Welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit about the steps in writing your synthesis. Now, earlier in the first segment of this, I kept stressing this is an explanatory synthesis. Now, I'm going to contradict myself ever so slightly because I wanted that to be in your head the entire time. This in no way is an argument or meant to be a persuasive piece. So let's go through the steps and I'll show you what I mean. If you recall, you've done the summary, you've done the critique, and this incorporates both, but adds some more depth to it. So in step one, you decide on your purpose and form a working thesis. There are other methods. Some people find the sources and then do a thesis, but knowing your purpose and have a working thesis, which means perhaps it's not your final thesis, can really help guide your writing. So try to do that before you begin. Beginning with that working thesis and that clear purpose can help you focus in on those sources and what type you're going to use to support your explanation to the readers. If you look at step 2 here, select and read your sources closely. I've already stressed that, so I won't stress it again, but it's very important. It may help if you diagram or outline your sources. The reason for that is that, especially when you're looking at the similarities and differences, which you see down in the next step, if you're looking at those, sometimes diagramming those, you can draw those connections visually, and it will help you actually outline and write your synthesis. You also have to determine whether or not the points inside of the pieces that you're examining are informative or argumentative. And while you can present the points that are argumentative from the source that you're using, you're not actually doing that for the purposes of arguing. You're doing that to explain the connection to your thesis. And also, another important point, of course, with any research is to determine whether or not the sources that you're finding are actually usable. During this assignment, it'll be particularly important for you to make sure that you're going through those and that they are appropriate and supportive. You do want to find some connections between the two or more sources that you use, which can make it even more important to truly examine them. Step 3, you're going to write an introductory paragraph, perhaps 2. It contains a clear thesis telling the reader what you're going to be addressing in the paper. So as we talked about before about the fluoride issue, there are all types of issues out there, and by doing a search on like EBSCOhost or some of the databases that you're already familiar with, you can pick up on those pretty well. You can also, one tip that I might give you that might help you is when you're looking through your sources to use for the paper, if you go to the end of any research, usually there is a segment describing or explaining what further research is needed, and that might help you kind of zone in on what you might use for your topic. The introductory paragraph should introduce the sources, and this includes the titles and the authors, so you're actually going to name them in this one. Other pertinent introductory information that's not included in the summary, critique, or synthesis sections can also be included. You really want it to be a well-rounded introductory paragraph or paragraph so that you introduce the reader to what you're about to do to avoid confusion. Step 4, just like the summary exercise, you're going to summarize each source. So you're going to read them and you're going to get an overall view of those sources in your own words. In this section, you are not going to give any of your personal opinions at all. You're going to use only your words and information from the article. Notice here it says it remains objective. So, and also the length of the section depends on how long the article is. You may have some of the students in the critique exercise had articles that were up to 20 pages long, and some of the articles were 5 or 6 pages. So it's really going to matter on the length. The summary portion of the assignment will not have any of your opinions in it. Remember last time when we were going through your critiques. This section is very important. It gives the reader the objective overview. It's important when you're doing this in synthesis, especially because you give the overviews and then you connect those sources later to each other and to your thesis. So step 5 is where you actually critique your sources, and you have done this before, so it shouldn't be very difficult. In the critique, you will evaluate the sources you found, just like you did in your last paper. You'll examine the logic of the article, discuss the validity of the arguments that the author makes, and how those actually connect and support the thesis of that article. So you truly are doing a critique and evaluation of the articles that you found. Now, these steps, the ones that I've talked about already, are the same as you've already done. So this information shouldn't be anything new to you. Step 6 is where you respond to what you've read. So this is an opportunity to discuss your opinion, but keep in mind where I kept stressing this is explanatory, is that it's not your job to convince, it's not your job to persuade, it's not your job to actually make a full-fledged argument. That's not the purpose of a synthesis. Think basic research. So you're supporting your own thesis, you're explaining it to the reader. Be careful to base this opinion on the sources and avoid trying to convince the reader. Avoid trying to voice your personal testament to your topic. So you want to really be careful and base your opinion only on what you found. So that'll be something that will be a little more difficult, but you can do it because you have done that in part of your critique. So step 7's a little bit different in this. You want to make sure that those sources that you have found, again, that they carefully and purposefully connect to your thesis. So in what ways do they support your discussion of the topic that you've chosen? Wait to identify weaknesses until the end. And I actually put this part in the conclusion or comments, much as you would perhaps a dissertation research piece. So at the end of dissertation research pieces, you can find a place where it talks about gaps in research and further needed research. And that's kind of how you handle this one. You want to wait to identify those weaknesses until later. The step 7 piece is really to identify the supporting points for your discussion that you found inside those sources. So you want to also connect the sources to each other. Now this component is probably new for you. You actually do it naturally in research. So it's really been done before. You just haven't looked at it from this angle. If you completely disregard the word synthesis and think research, that may help you somewhat. So what are the common things, the common themes, the common points between the articles, between the sources of information that you found? And there must be some for this assignment because you have to draw in the connections between those pieces. What are the differences in the points made in the articles? This isn't necessarily considered a gap. It's the difference in the themes that you're using to support. Are there any new conclusions that you have come to after reading the sources? Recall in class where we talked about synthesis and I talked about the Pride and Prejudice piece where they've combined zombies with it, which I thought was rather bizarre, but it is certainly synthesis where they've synthesized a classic novel and zombies to make something completely new. Perhaps you found some interesting research pieces, articles, and you feel like that there's something you learned that sort of produces a new idea, something that you conclude by putting those pieces together. So are there any new conclusions that you came to after reading the sources that further support your thesis? So keep that in mind during this step. Step 8, finally you've come to the end. You'll conclude your research. So it's just like all other research papers that you might write. A conclusion is meant to tie up things, to pull it all together. And you want to make sure you're not introducing brand new concepts. However, you do want to address any gaps or areas that the sources did not address and how you might work on those had this been a full research project. And of course, you won't word it that way. You don't want to say, if this had been a full research project, then I would have wanted you to bring in more sources. I want you to be a little bit more specific on that and talk about truly what the author or one of the authors may have overlooked in their research that you picked, and that perhaps you found something out there that's better, and you can even mention that one. You can bring in outside resources. Be careful not to introduce new ideas, but to actually point out the gaps. And don't forget that you want to very carefully and thoughtfully connect the resources, the sources that you found, to not just each other, but to your thesis. And that is the slight difference that you might find in the way this assignment is explained as opposed to other research types. And again, you naturally do this. You naturally synthesize whenever you do research. This is just another way of saying it, another way of labeling it and looking at it. Let's talk about support or evidence for your topic. Your support is what helps others understand your thesis. What are you discussing? The discussion should enhance the reader's understanding of your subject. So when you're looking at sources, you're really going to want to look for things that will help the reader understand. Support comes in the form of facts or expert opinion. There may be some others that you can incorporate, but those are going to be the main ones for this. And while an author of an article or essay may take a position, just remember that you want to be very careful pulling out the most important points to support your thesis and try to avoid arguing or persuading. Your support or your sources serve as illustrations and evidence. You're trying to help the reader understand something better. So in your case, you're going to be talking about an issue in your field, or I've given the option of using some of the essays in your book, which will be in your writing prompt for this assignment. There's some really good ones, and those also connect to certain fields. So there are all kinds of different ways that you can go about finding sources. And recall our database that you've been using through the Western Kentucky University Libraries. That's also going to be very helpful for this. Let's go on to the last slide here. Just as a reminder, the APA format is expected. At the beginning of the course, we talked about all of the different programs of study that you ran, and we agreed that APA had been used in all of those. Recall that the font in this essay will be 12 font, Times New Roman. You include a cover page with properly formatted running head. Recall that the cover page has the words running head. The R is capitalized, the H is lowercase, and a colon, a space, and a shortened version of your title, or your title if it's short, in all caps. And then the second page does not follow that. It does not have the words running head on it, but it does have the all capped title on it. So every page thereafter would be the same as the second one. And then you always include page numbers. I have a template to help you out just with the general formatting that will be attached to this assignment, but I know that you're all fully capable of doing the formatting, paying attention to the citations, citing all of your sources. And in this assignment, you are allowed 2 to 4 sources, because if you find 2 that are short, your paper may not meet the minimum writing requirements for the assignment. And again, that will all be in the writing prompt. And just don't forget to include your references page. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this helped as a supplemental video to help you understand synthesis a little bit more. I'll see you in class. Have a great day.